Hello, 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 everyone. This is Laura Huckman, the medical matchmaker, and I am joined today by the one and only Dr. Laura Sutton. Dr. Sutton, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. This is so much fun.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm gonna have you introduce yourself. Dr. Sutton is such an incredible coach, so
Thank you.
I'd like to not butcher it and have you have you introduce yourself and all the things you're doing.
Yeah. So, Laura Sutton, I'm a family physician by training, and I am a coach as well. I coach physicians and also within medical groups, so executive leaders as well, individual and group coaching. And I recently published a book. So, I know we're going to talk about that some. Yes, you got it there. The Purposeful MD, Creating the Life You Live Without Guilt, came out in October. Also a consultant and a speaker. So I love what I do. I'm the founder of Purposeful MD and just really excited to partner with amazing people like you and happy to be here.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited, and I do want to chat with you about a few things, that you talk about in the book, and what I really like about this, and we'll get into things, very soon. Is it's a quick read, it's an easy read, it's engaging, and it's actionable. It's not just like fluff. So I like that. It's just the right amount of fluff that keeps you interested. So we're going to talk about, living a purposeful life, creating the life that you love without guilt. And I think, when I think back to my first real job as a physician, and I know this is so common for so many of us, we have that arrival fallacy. I got to this job. I had a wonderful husband. I had one kid at the time. I had this great job. And I was like, and now what? So I think, as physicians, to be a physician, you have to be very smart. You have to be very disciplined to be able to get to that point. But then when you spend your whole life with this purpose of becoming a doctor, and then you're here, and now what? Now it's almost like we've lost that purpose. And I think that's where a lot of us get lost, right? Like we arrive, and then what?
Right.
So, how would you define purposeful living for,
Yeah.
those of us that have now arrived? Now what?
Yeah. So I just want to say that I'm resonating so much with everything that you're saying and thinking back to my experiences as a trainee, even back to high school. I think a lot of us, at least I know I did. I knew I wanted to be a physician when I was pretty young. And so that path starts early for a lot of us. We have to make sure we study the right things in college. And then we have to make sure we get into medical school and get into residency. So there's always this like looking for something forward and working towards something that's in the future. And things are constantly changing too. We change courses every semester, every year in college and medical school. Same thing. We're on these different rotations, different classes. And so things are changing around us so often. In residency, different rotations. And so when you get out to be in practice or as an attending or whatever that looks like, it kind of gets to be very rote and very routine. And some of that stimulation is gone. And I don't think that's something that nobody ever told me that it was going to be like that. Right. And so it was nothing that I was ever prepared for. I also had a newborn at the time that I was finishing residency. And so all those changes that were coming along at the same time. I just resonate with that so much. And so if you're feeling that, if you're watching, listening, you're feeling that, just know you're not alone. Lots of things happen in my life, which we could get to, but, really thinking about what living purposefully is to me is living in accordance with your own values, with intention and living the life that you want and not necessarily a life that is prescribed for you or that other people have expectations for you, but living very intentionally, very purposefully towards feelings, emotions, places, people, whatever lights you up. I mean, that's what makes life amazing. I was just on a Zoom call earlier this morning with a former residency faculty of mine, and he said, I haven't seen him in 20 years, but he said, I do the things that I don't, or I do the things that I want to do, and I don't do the things that I don't want to do. And I said, that's beautiful. That's really what life is about, and what I want for the people that I work with. So that's how I define living purposefully.
That's so great. And so many of us think, what should I be doing? What's expected of me? Or maybe not even thinking it, but feeling it, or doing stuff that we maybe don't want to do without realizing that we're doing stuff we don't want to do
Mhm.
because it's what's being expected. It's what we feel like we should be doing. And knowing that doing what we want is how we get enjoyment out of life. We only have one life. Why
Mhm.
not do the things we want to be doing? But I think this was the first chapter in your book. You talked about just figuring out your why.
Mhm.
That's such an important first step because so many of us haven't had that until now. We've been so pigeonholed. And, I feel like I had the blinkers on all of my life until I had my first job of we're going to get to medical school. And then I felt like I was at my quarter life crisis. Not quarter. Wow, that would be great if I lived that long. But, I had this like early midlife crisis because I was like, okay, I'm here. And now what do I want?
Right.
So, yeah, that's very true. So do the things you want. So what do you feel like are the first steps to doing what you want and not doing what you don't want? It sounds so easy. It sounds so logical, but to put that into practice, what do you feel like the first steps should be?
Yeah. So I think you mentioned it, is knowing really what our values are. And it's an exercise that you mentioned. I walk through in the book. I walk through a lot when I work with clients and when I do speaking engagements, is identifying what are our values and how do we live in more alignment with them. Being very practical on this. So when we're doing that, it sounds so like kind of vision board and woo woo, but it's really not. It's very practical. When we can define what our core values are and then adjust our behaviors as needed in order to live more alignment with those values, then we don't have to make as many decisions. Life becomes easier, and we don't have to decide every time we are brought up against a conflict. And I don't necessarily mean a conflict as something bad, but just we have decisions to make every day. Am I going to do this or am I going to do that? And when we're clear with our values, it guides us towards one set of decisions over another. So, for instance, my daughter is a senior in high school this year, and we're very, very grateful. She's gotten into her dream school, which is across the country. That means that she's in August of next year, she's going to be moving out of the house. And so my time with her home is limited. That I've been very intentional about how I create my schedule and create my year around making sure I'm there for her in times when she needs me. And that simplifies a lot of decisions for me. So if I get invited to events that conflict with things that I've planned with her, then I know I've already made the decision in advance. I don't have to wrestle with it. So when we can live more in alignment with those values, it allows us to live purposefully because we're intentionally behaving in ways that live out those values. So that's the first step. And like you said, a lot of us don't routinely ask ourselves what we want. I've gotten that comment, and when I coach physicians and clinicians, a lot of people say, well, nobody's really ever asked me that. And so being clear with ourselves and getting quiet with ourselves, knowing what those values are, can be really, really helpful.
And it makes it easier to set boundaries because if you think about what you just said, where um, I have this, I have a kid, we have plans together, but now I'm on call, or maybe you're a solo physician and a patient calls you, whatever happens, and you're like, well, do I run into the hospital to do whatever, this emergent surgery that I guess someone else could do, or do I go, shopping with my kid for her prom dress? Whatever it is, if you've already clarified those values, it makes it a lot easier to set boundaries with
Mhm.
yourself and with
Yes.
others.
Yes. And then when you can speak those out, then other people already know, and they'll kind of shift their requests of you. Now, I say that kind of tongue in cheek because we can't control what other people ask of us, but
Right.
over time, if we set those boundaries and people know what those boundaries are, then it can shift kind of how often we're asked to do things, or if we're asked to do things. And so it can be incredibly, incredibly helpful. You think about companies like Southwest Airlines as an example, right? One of their values is transparency. So they're going to do things that really showcase that. Another one of their values is hospitality. They're going to do certain things that showcase that. That means that they're not going to do other things that might showcase other values that another competitor might have. So it helps us inform the things that we do, and then also helps us inform the things that we don't do. And our values can shift over time. I think that's something else too, that to keep in mind. Maybe when we're younger and before we have families, we value freedom. Maybe when we're a little bit older and we have young kids, freedom is not something we value as much. We want to be home more with them. We want to be spending time more with them. And so those values can shift over time too. I think that's something that's helpful, is when we do that, an exercise and understanding what our values are, it's not written in stone. Those can shift.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's so true. And I'm sure, next year when you have one kid out the house, that's going to shift again.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
very true. I mean, kids are everything, right?
Yes. Yes.
Why do you think so? You say creating the life you love without guilt. That's huge. Because
Hmm.
sure, we can all create the life we love, but guilt is such a big thing for so many of us. Why do you think that it's so pervasive for physicians and other high achieving professions?
Yeah. We are literally rewarded for sacrificing our own needs. So if we think about when we're in training, when we're in medical school, residency, fellowship, whatever that looks like, and even outside of training environment, I know a lot of, especially academic, maybe attending physicians, a lot of physicians are busier now than they were in residency. And so I don't mean that it stops in residency, but it or stops after we graduate, but it really begins in that training environment, that when we sacrifice our own needs, we are literally rewarded. So I remember getting scolded being post call. So up all day, up all night, and then awake all day the next day. It's like 4 p.m. I'm sitting in the middle of a cardiology lecture, nodding off and getting scolded for it. And so we are, it's really just this pervasive, like, ignore your own need as a human being for sleep. We ignore our needs for things like going to the bathroom, eating. I mean, these are biologic needs, right? And we have this kind of badge of honor about who slept the least, or who ate the least, or who didn't get to go to the bathroom for 9 hours, whatever that looks like. And we are rewarded for it, for ignoring our own needs. And so we're rewarded in the form of good grades or coveted rotations, coveted internships, letters of recommendation. I mean, I remember my recommendation letters talked about how much I was a team player. And there's nothing wrong with being a team player inherently, but in that context, it's that I was so self-sacrificial that I ignored what I needed. And so we our bodies feel that guilt when we're not able to please the people around us. And so that guilt is really, really strong. And I see a lot in women who, and again, I know this is a generalization, but women who are, still, parenthood is very different for people who give birth than it is for people who don't give birth. And so those expectations can be really strong about what it looks like for us to be parents. And so I feel like that guilt can be so really damaging to us, and it's not necessary. But it's helpful to look and see, where does that come from, that we can say, oh yeah, I was brought up in that environment. It's like the asking the fish what water is. The fish doesn't know what water is. It's just all around. So when we can recognize it, then we can see, yeah, maybe that feeling, it comes from there, but I'm not in that environment anymore. And I don't have to feel that way. I don't have to feel guilty for going to the bathroom when I need to, for eating when I need to, sleeping when I need to, these basic things. I don't have to feel guilty for taking care of my own needs. So I had one of my coaches once tell me guilt is for criminals. And that was when I was struggling, feeling guilty about something. And I think it was related to extra sleep that I needed. I remember the conversation very vividly. So I know that was a lot, but that's what I've seen in my own experience and then and people that I coach.
Yeah, this reminds me about a podcast I was listening to that a friend of mine recorded. And she talked about how in residency, she would take her hair and tie it up into on her, when she was post call and we have to then drive home. And she would tie her hair into the window of the car so that if she nodded off, it would
Oh my
it would,
gosh.
it would jerk her awake. And of course, the logical
Wow.
response is, oh my goodness. And you know what my response was? That's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? And it just shows like, how messed up is that? Oh my goodness. Like, not
Yeah.
number one, that she did it. And number two, that our response to that would be brilliant.
Hmm.
Wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah. It's amazing though. And talking to friends and family of mine who are not in the medical profession about some of these challenges and some of these things that we experience and go through, they're like, "What?" Like my writing coach, as she was reading the stories, and she was like, is this really?" And she wasn't questioning me, but she was like, "I can't believe this happened, and these are things that go on." And I said, "Yeah, this is why your physicians are probably unhappy right now, and this is the environment that we are brought up in." And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Something I find so important that I always try to tell people is to really stand up for ourselves. I think there's so many people in medicine who are doing these big, great things to try to change medicine, but there's so many things that we can do just individually, which is setting those boundaries and saying no and saying, I can't work that day, or no, I will not take this extra whatever for free, or, we do
Mhm.
so much unpaid work in medicine. And so something that keeps coming up in my head while we're talking about guilt and we're talking about purpose and finding your why and all of these things is in not completely, but in a large sense, we teach people how to treat us.
Mhm.
And so we have gone through the training where we're rewarded for self-sacrificing, where we're not sleeping, we're not saying no to things that maybe are unsafe. And then we come out of training and then we feel the same way. And we feel very much in this victim role. And I see
Mhm.
this in the physicians that I've helped them find jobs. It's not so much what do I want? It's what, you know, it's interesting in this like not knowing what they want and going for that. It's just going for everything
Mhm.
and then just taking the one that's like, well, maybe that'll be the best. Whereas their values are really over here and they're
Mhm.
taking jobs there. And then we get to the job and we just self-sacrifice, self-sacrifice, self-sacrifice. And
Mhm.
then we're in this profession where everyone's burned out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah, I'm sure you see that a lot, these mismatches between organizational values. And I see this too, where if somebody, there's a physician who they have a value set on one side and the organization has value sets on the other side, then there's just not going to be really great alignment. And it doesn't mean that there's right or wrong. It's just there's a mismatch there. And then I see what you're talking about as well. And I know we've talked about this before, is say that physician then goes to another organization and thinks it's going to be different. Well, maybe that organization has the same set of values that your previous organization did. And if you know that going in, and then that's okay, as long as eyes wide open type thing. But if you're fooling yourself and thinking, well, it's going to be different when you know that full well that it's not, then you're kind of just setting yourself up for different for a disappointment, I guess I should say. And the so much talk lately about organizational healthcare value sets, and what we're seeing as a country right now. Um, and I think there really is. I really do feel like we're at an inflection point where we're seeing physicians get upset, and rightly so, about some things that are going on, and then how is the healthcare industry responding? Because without physicians, then there's nobody to take care of the patient. So I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be very interesting over the next couple of years what we see.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see where things go. I hope for the better, for sure.
I do too.
Um, yeah,
I do too. I've worked with a lot of organizations, and I do really feel like a lot of them want to do the right thing and want their physicians to be taken care of and to be happy. And so that does give me hope.
yeah. Knowing what you know now, would you go back in time and tell yourself anything, or would you tell physicians watching this anything in particular?
I don't know if I would tell myself anything in particular, just because I feel like everything has brought me to this point. So I felt like I had to go through all of that, but I would love to save other physicians a lot of the challenges that I went through. Um, I think listen to your gut. I mean, there were so many times, and I get really personal in the book, talk about different situations in which I just felt something's not right. And I kind of went along to get along, because I felt that too, is I should just be grateful for what I have. And um, there were times when I wish I had said something about what was going on, that I wasn't happy with it or wasn't right. So yeah, listen to your gut, and yeah, guilt is not required. Guilt is never required.
That's true. That's very true. So you coach physicians.
Yes.
What do you typically focus on when you're coaching physicians?
Anything that the physician wants to coach on. I mean, a lot of physicians are struggling with the same things that I struggled with, which not having enough time to do the things that they want, feeling unfulfilled, wanting more, but really not quite sure what that is, managing through stress, difficult emotions, setting boundaries. So anything that the physician wants to work on, I'm there for it.
I love that. Well, thank you. Where can people find you if they're looking for you?
Yeah, the best place is my website. It's thepurposefulmdmedicaldoctor.com. So thepurposefulmd.com. That's the best place to get in touch with me.
Great. And I really do want to give a shout out to this book again. If anyone's watching and is curious about Dr. Suttin, you've got to read this book. It's really good. It's really an easy read. I'm at this interesting phase of my life right now where I cannot read unless it's like really light, nothing. But this one, I could read this one. It was meaningful. It was light, but it was really, really great. So please, everyone, go out and get the book too.
Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you. It was so nice having you. I really appreciate you here. Um, Before we go, I'm going to ask one last question to leave with everyone, which is what would you suggest? How do you help people overcome the fear of saying no, or if they have the guilt of prioritizing their own needs?
That we have needs. We're human, and we have to. If we don't prioritize ourselves, nobody else is going to.
Great. Well, thank you for having us, and have a great new year.
Thank you so much.